Everyone, thanks a million. Thank you, Leighton, for having me. I'm Yvonne McDermott Rees. I'm a professor in the law school, and I'm going to talk to you about this project that we've been working on for the last year or so called True, Trust in User-Generated Evidence. And I think it feeds on really nicely from actually some of the stuff that Dion was talking about in terms of trust and provenance, but also some of the issues that Leighton raised earlier today. True is a project that was selected for funding by the European Research Council, and because of Brexit, it is not funded by the European Research Council anymore. It's funded by UKRI, but we won't talk about that. So just a little bit by way of background, what we mean when we talk about user-generated evidence of human rights violations. So the backdrop to this project was another project I worked on for a few years called OSR for Rights, which was examine the use of open source open source research and open source information, improving human rights violations. So really, I think particularly since the Arab Spring, but we see it all the time now that in conflicts around the world, people pick up their mobile phones and they record what they see. I'm an international criminal lawyer, an evidence lawyer, and I was interested in, could we use this for accountability processes for human rights violations? So when we started in this work in 2017, people thought we were completely mad. They're like, what? You know, stuff on the internet in court? Like, no, it's not going to happen. It's fair to say the landscape has changed completely in that 5 or so years. Not because that we did, just because of the way that technology has developed, the volume of really useful information and evidence showing human rights violations has just become so widespread. And we see courts around the world are starting to use this information in accountability processes. So UN human rights fact-finding missions, international courts, and also domestic courts prosecuting international crimes. And one thing I noticed was almost without exception, every time I presented on our research on this, someone in the audience would say, yeah, but what about deepfakes? And I'm like, what's going on here? But, you know, people would say, well, I've seen this video of Barack Obama and it's very, very convincing. Like, how can we trust what we see? And the idea was, I think, that we were almost in some sort of golden era for user-generated evidence, but as deepfakes became more widespread, more convincing, more easy to generate, then you know, the evidential value of this kind of real content would be reduced. And organizations like Witness and authors like the Canadian philosopher Regina Rini have said that actually the biggest danger with the advent of deepfakes and AI generated images and video is probably not that faked footage could somehow be introduced into courtroom processes, but rather that we'll come to reflexively dismiss real footage as, oh, well, it could be fake, it could not. But no one has actually tested this question. So that's what this project is all about. We're trying to figure it out. Great. So, oh yeah, sorry, I have something. So this is just some examples of how this kind of evidence has been used in international and domestic courts. So there was a case called Al-Rafali before the International Criminal Court. Al-Rafali was a Libyan military commander, and there were videos posted actually by, this is one of the ironies of this type of work, is that often the perpetrators themselves that are sharing some of the content that's used against them. So the group that he was a member of posted some videos of them killing some people that they'd taken prisoner of war. And he was, an arrest warrant was issued by the International Criminal Court in which this evidence was really, really central to the arrest warrant. And my former PhD student now graduated, Carolina, has written on how a range of domestic jurisdictions have used this kind of evidence. Yeah, so this is our research question. How have deepfakes and related technological advances impacted on trust in user-generated evidence? And what does that mean for the future of this kind of evidence in human rights accountability processes, broadly defined? So I just want to share with you some of our investigative clusters, how we're looking at this question. And then I'll share, as I said, we've been doing this since July, 2022. So I can share some very early findings from the research that we've done so far. So we're doing legal analysis, looking at cases from around the world. To what extent have allegations that, oh, well, this might be a deepfake crept into real life cases? What are the sort of factors that are taken into account when assessing the credibility and reliability of user-generated evidence? I have an amazing postdoc working with me, Alice Green, who's done and will continue to do some online psychology studies with real people, just seeing to what extent lay people have been impacted by the rise in deepfakes and other AI-generated media in assessing user-generated evidence. And we're going to do some mock jury trials, which will be lots of fun. So together with Bellingcat, I don't know if people have heard of Bellingcat, they're like an investigative journalism organisation, and GLAN, the Global Legal Action Network. 2 years ago, we did a mock admissibility hearing. So we put together a fictional case from the war in Yemen, and there was a fictional defendant who was on trial for war crimes here in the courts of England and Wales. We had a real life judge, Joanna Corder, who's now the UK's judge in the International Criminal Court, and barristers for prosecution and defence. People from Bellingcat were our expert witnesses. And we were trying to assess whether in the courts of England and Wales, this kind of content would be admissible, unlike some of the countries that Carolina's written about, Germany, Finland, the Netherlands, and Sweden, which have a civil law inquisitorial legal system. Here in England and Wales, we have a much more strict legal system in terms of what's admissible as evidence. So we put together this whole exercise of cross-examination, and ultimately the judge said, yes, I think this kind of evidence could be admissible in these circumstances. But I'd give some warnings to the jury about things they should take into account. So that made me think, oh, actually, this is only telling half the story. We need to get some fictional jury members in to see how they evaluate this kind of evidence and what sort of terms they use in doing that. So there's a little bit of linguistic analysis there. I'll have a PhD student with Nuria Lorenzo-Deuce, who's going to we'll work together in assessing the kind of terms that people use. But let me just share with you a couple of initial findings. So on the case law, what's happening in real life cases? I'll give two examples, and there are more, so we can talk about that afterwards. So the first is, you'll be familiar with the January 6th storming of the Capitol in the US. So one of the people who was on trial there for his role in that did try to put forward this argument that, okay, sure, you've got loads of video evidence, stuff that was posted on Facebook from the day, but, as you know, anything could be fake. So, he basically tried to challenge the admissibility of the evidence against him. It didn't fly with the court. They were like, okay, you can't just say it could be fake. You need to give us something more on that. And the second example I'll give is there was a recent case in the European Court of Human Rights. It's the Netherlands and Ukraine against Russia, and it's to do with the earlier invasion of Ukraine by Russia, so 2014, the Donetsk and Luhansk regions. And essentially, again, Bellingcat had done some work showing that these missiles had to have been fired from Russian-controlled territory on the border of eastern Ukraine. And to do that, they used some information that was posted on VK.com, which is like the Russian social network. So there was a guy who'd taken a picture of himself with a tank in the background, and they did some geolocation. Look, we can see this mountain, we can see this thing. It has to have been taken in this area. And the Dutch have got a thing called the JIT, the Joint Investigations Team, where they basically did use similar information to geolocate this piece of content and say, we think this missile came from Russian-controlled army base. And the Russians said they actually found that there were two versions of the same photo online. So it's a guy in the foreground and there's a tank just behind him. And in one version of the photo, there's a number on the tank. And then another version, the number on the tank, the serial number, is removed. And so the Russians said, this proves it's generated by AI. I was like, what? But they said, look, and they said the Dutch JIT, they relied on the analysis of what they call so-called citizen journalists. You know, they shouldn't have done that, basically. But the court said, well, without evidence that this has been generated by AI, we can't just assume that that's the case. And in any case, the Dutch and Ukrainian legal teams were able to show that there were actually two same versions of the same photo online. So it had been edited, but that didn't mean that it was completely AI generated, manipulated. It seems actually what happened was the guy maybe got in trouble with his battalion leader or something for having this video or this image with the number of the tank in the background. So he edited it out and then he re-uploaded his new profile picture, him with a big tank. So yeah, so we can see actually that the perception that, oh, once we all become really familiar with what AI can do and how impressive it is, that suddenly it'll become very easy for, well, in the literature, they call it the liar's dividend, that perpetrators will just be able to easily dismiss real footage as potentially fake. And there are issues of the sort of epistemic injustice there that can arise. Where does the burden fall on those who are trying to show that human rights violations have happened? Typically, they're in a weaker position of power. And, you know, if it falls to you to show, not only to present evidence, but also to show that all of that evidence is real, and then that, you know, puts a heavier burden on litigants. So the earlier case law analysis suggests that that's not happening yet, or at least the courts are being a little bit more like, okay, well, no, you can't just suggest that it could be AI generated and that we'll accept that. I would say, though, I've been in conversation with people from Witness, the video as evidence organizations, and they said, well, we work with like environmental human rights defenders, and they have found this problem really has happened. So in some cases, the people have tried to take in Brazil, the large multinational corporations who were responsible for environmental damage have said, what is this? You know, this is just something someone captured on their mobile phone. It could be generated by AI. We just don't know. And the judge has been like, oh, good point. So I think maybe there's a difference between legal systems here. You know, this is something we'll have to investigate in more detail as the project goes on. Very quickly, I'm conscious of my time. So from our interviews with judges, so back in November, how long do I have today? In about 3 minutes? You stopped me, just like, yeah, rugby tackle me or something, is it? So back in November, we interviewed 8 sitting judges in the International Criminal Court. There are 18 of them in total, so close to half of them, as well as lawyers, both prosecution and defence, and various people. And in that, we kind of dug into what are the perceived benefits and challenges in the use of user-generated evidence, and secondly, what factors do they take into account when assessing the perceived authenticity and reliability of this kind of evidence. So on benefits, a lot of judges talked about, you know, in international criminal trials in particular, there is a long history of problems with witness testimony. That this is because, you know, often these trials happen 20 years after the incident in question, and people are being brought in front of a court, and it's like, well, you said this in your statement, and it might be a statement they made 15 years ago, which was itself 5 years after the incident in question. And so it's very easy actually to kind of pick at that as a, you know, as the defendant's right, you know, you have the right to challenge the evidence against you, but to kind of suggest that there are credibility issues. So the idea that evidence of this nature, particularly like a video, it kind of speaks for itself. This came across a lot. On the other hand, when it came to disadvantages, a lot of people talked about the sort of the biases that can inhere to this kind of evidence. So like Nathan was saying about the metaverse, that the same issues that happen in the real world can just transfer to the digital world, exactly the same issues of biases, power, who has access to this technology to be able to share this information, and you know, how cognitive and technical biases can impact on what we see and how we interpret it, did come out a lot as a challenge to this kind of evidence. Interestingly, so in the human rights space, there's a lot, like everyone else, everyone got really excited about blockchain a few years back. and actually distributed ledger technology in particular. So it's almost become, I guess, best practice or common practice to use hashing when you're preserving a piece of content, that you hash it. And then the idea is it preserves the sort of chain of custody of that evidence. So from the time that Dion found it and saved it in the spreadsheet and we hashed it, we can tell no one's manipulated it since. And interestingly, none of the judges mentioned this. So some of them talked about metadata, some of them talked about their dedicated apps that are supposed to like capture all of the relevant metadata and how that might be used more than stuff that's posted on Twitter or Facebook where all that metadata is stripped. But no one seems to be very alive to the potentials of hashing. So there's a question there as well about like how the community might raise the standards and the expectation of what's required, when actually from a legal point of view, they don't really care about the chain of custody from the moment that Dion, human rights investigator, found it. There's no question that he's the one who's manipulated. But like the whole point is that it could have been manipulated before you found it online. And so that's what they were really interested in. Who created this? Can we tell anything about the creator, about the, their standpoint? Is there other evidence to corroborate it? So that's, I'll leave that there in terms of interviews with judges. I want to quickly end on our first online study. So we've done a study with 334 participants, I think, where we showed them a video from the Syrian archive. So it's a video from Syria that just shows a missile basically landing. And we asked participants to tell us in free speech, like or free text responses, how would you go about assessing the credibility, reliability of this evidence? What sort of factors would you, so there was established Likert scales in terms of identifying authenticity. So how would you rate this? And then we gave them a task where we said, you're a journalist. Assume you're writing a story on this. How would you use this? What factors would you take into account? So it was really interesting because a lot has been done on trust in media. A lot has been done on trust in, not a lot, there's some literature on trust in user-generated content, but usually that relates to like online reviews, Wikipedia. To our knowledge, this is the first study of its type of its kind on trust in user-generated audiovisual content. And really interesting, some of the things that came out, I can go into this in more detail afterwards if of interest. But for example, what was interesting for me was a lot of people put a lot of value on the amateur nature of the video. And so you think, oh, well, maybe if something's more polished and clean, then, that might be seen as intuitively more convincing. But so many people said, well, the camera is shaky. I can hear some voices in the background. This is clearly taking the spur of the moment. So intuitively, I find that more convincing. We looked at some correlations, like what factors impact on these value judgments. So as maybe might be expected, people who tend to get their news from social media, there was a strong correlation with how trustworthy they found this piece of content, trust in social media more generally. There was a weak correlation, but it was there in pre-existing knowledge or pre-existing perceived exposure to deepfakes. But maybe not as strong as we might have assumed, that people, once they're aware of deepfakes, might become more pessimistic about the trustworthiness of the piece of content. And the last strong correlation was between age and or negative correlation. So older people tended to be like, I don't believe this piece of content. So that's it in a nutshell. Very whistle-stop tours. Look forward to any questions or comments.